Hey, what's going on? So, this is going to be more about the Blonde Ghost Network that I'm kind of talking about how, the Blonde Ghost Network of Edwin P. Wilson, Ted Shackley, i.e. the Blonde Ghost, Frank Terpil, Greg Corcala, Kevin Mulcahy, Thomas Klein, Richard C. Cord, all these characters were kind of involved in a lot of crazy stuff that the CIA was doing in the 70s and 80s. And a lot of the Blonde Ghost Network has ties to the Golden Triangle of Southeast Asia, where opium running was happening, Australia with the Nugan Hand Bank scandal. Um, Let me see here, the Iran Contra affair, um, covert action in Africa, Latin American right wing dictatorships and terrorists, Miami drug smuggling with the Cuban community, etc. So, one thing about the Blonde Ghost Network. So, in the last video, I talked about Edwin P. Wilson, right? In a really good article by Peter Mass in the New York Times Magazine, which was excerpts of his book exploring the life of Edwin Wilson and the downfall of Edwin Wilson. But one thing in the article is that they talk about the use of Green Berets. Green Berets were used. It is kind of crazy just to think how Green Berets were being used by the CIA and these networks. And sometimes these were active duty military people doing assassinations on private citizens. Some pretty wild stuff. And also helping to train Gaddafi and other hostile forces to the United States, presumably under the watchful eye of the Central Intelligence Agency. Um, so some of these Green Berets were like people like Billy Wall, Luke Thompson, um, Michael Hand, who eventually ended up going to found the Nugan Hand Bank of Australia, which later collapsed and was largely just a bank used to move illicit proceeds from opium sales. And Michael Hand eventually disappeared off the face of the earth just to be discovered living in Idaho, um, actually not too long ago. But regardless, I want to talk about a specific Green Beret called Eugene Tafoya, right? So in this article by Peter Mass called "Selling Out: How an Ex-CIA Agent Made Millions Working for Gaddafi," published in April 13th, 1986. One excerpt before I read more is so the same. So you had Edwin P. Wilson, who kind of was beefing with one of his business partners, a fellow CIA spooks, Tom Clines, and Tom Clines was involved in Iran Contra. So there was like a money dispute between Wilson and Clines. Wilson ends up sicking a Green Beret on Clines to basically shake him down to get his money back. So by the spring of 1980, Wilson was an indicted fugitive, and thus unable to operate from his usual bases in the United States, Britain, and Switzerland. Holed up in Libya, he sent a former Green Beret to warn Clines that he wanted his $500,000 back or else, and eventually he was repaid. The same Green Beret, Eugene Tafoya, was dispatched by Wilson on a request from Hajaji, who was actually the head of Libya's intelligence service, so to assassinate a dissident Libyan student in Colorado. So Edwin Wilson was leasing out these Green Berets to Libyan intelligence and the military, um, and they were basically used as like a assassination squad to take out dissidents of the Libyan government and everything like that. So pretty wild stuff. Like a CIA operative with or very highly connected with the CIA is leasing out Green Berets still on active duty and on orders, um, to basically go hunt down dissidents of Gaddafi to go assassinate them. Like it totally just throws the whole narrative of like America fighting the bad guys out the window. And granted, maybe there was some four-dimensional chess going on, like Edwin Wilson was maybe trying to get on the good side of Gaddafi so he could basically burrow deeper into, maybe his aspiring nuclear program or something. So they say, but largely it seems that Edwin P. Wilson was largely acting from a place of greed, because he realized how lucrative the black market was. It was just basically him just playing both sides, creating as much chaos in the black market as possible. There's money to be made, and then maybe using that information to save his own neck if he's caught by the American authorities, and maybe using that information to, help the CIA or other intelligence agencies that are pro-Western and stuff like that, right? But regardless, the same Green Beret, Eugene Tafoya, was dispatched by Wilson on a request of Hajaji to assassinate a dissident Libyan student in Colorado. The student, although blinded in one eye, survived. Tafoya was apprehended and sentenced to 2 years imprisonment for assault and criminal conspiracy. In explaining why Tafoya had escaped conviction on criminal charges of attempted murder, one juror cited confusion over Tafoya's claim that he had been working for the CIA. Roberta Barnes, later, I think that was his Edwin Klein's girlfriend or mistress, later repeated to federal authorities what Wilson had told her. But there was, as they say, no smoking gun. So let me see here. So let me go up a little bit more. So this Eugene Tafoya is going to be the focus here, but I want to talk more about some of these Green Berets. All right. So we need to start at the top. Okay, so he received an order of long-range surveillance vans. So he's talking. So we're talking about the Libyan intelligence person and how Edwin Wilson was helping give them arms and goods that were basically banned by like the State Department and stuff like that, right? So he received an order for long-range surveillance vans designed for desert patrols and equipped with day and night vision TV cameras that had an image intensification tube whose unregulated export was forbidden by federal law. In between social events, Wilson demonstrated one of the cameras of Libyan intelligence officers right at Mount Airy Farms, which was his like mansion in kind of the countryside of Virginia. He entered into an agreement to provide veterans of the United States Special Forces, Green Berets, to train commando teams. So the Libyans paid $100,000 per Green Beret. Wilson in turn recruited each of them for half as much. So he's basically pimping out these Green Berets. So the Berets were a natural choice for Wilson. For years, the CIA had been using special forces men on covert missions that required military expertise, and the way he would frame it, this would appear to be just another officially sanctioned operation. For example, this is me just talking right now. Everybody knows about like the famous MAG, the Material Assistance Command, Special Observation Group, in the Vietnam War, right? Which are basically just like Green Beret special forces, who are basically on very top secret missions to go into like Laos and Cambodia to basically exterminate, threats. And these missions were so top secret that like if a person died, they were just gone, like because they basically almost didn't exist at that point. But so the first batch of former Green Berets, four of them toting war bags, were met by Wilson in Switzerland in Zurich's Airport International Zone. He took them to a coffee shop. They would later recall how impressed they were by him. He was their kind of guy, tough, down to earth, authoritative. He told them they were going to Libya. I want you to ingratiate yourselves with those people, get in tight with them, whatever it requires. One of the Green Berets had participated in many CIA missions in Southeast Asia, and that included assassination of suspected Viet Cong sympathizers and secret search and destroy attacks in Cambodia. He remembers thinking this sounded like an infiltration mission. There would be no signed contracts, Wilson said. If I Welsh, you'll come looking to kill me. If you Welsh, I'll be coming after you. That's our contract. You got any questions? Who are we working for? Me, said Wilson, and they appreciated how professionally cryptic his response was. Nothing more than necessary. No elaborate explanations. No pep talks. And the truth was that this was no weirder than dozens of agency ventures they had known about in the past. So by bringing in a Pentagon intelligence analyst, Wilson was able to supply Hijazi with a variety of top secret documents, including contingency plans for the Army's 82nd Airborne Division in case of trouble in the Middle East. So blatant treason here, right? And when Hijazi asked for a few American guns to be delivered to Libyan embassies here and there, Wilson threw them in at no extra charge. So during 1979 and 1980, 11 anti-Qaddafi Libyans were murdered in Europe. One of them, newly married with an infant daughter, was living in West Germany, was shot in the back while exiting from an underpass at the Bonn railroad station. The weapon, a .357 357 Magnum, was recovered and traced back to Fayetteville, North Carolina, where Fort Bragg is at, where it had been purchased by a former Green Beret working for Wilson. So think about that. So basically recruiting former Green Berets to be part of these kind of secretive assassination cadres, basically. So, okay. So let me do something here real quick. I'm going to pause real quick. Alright, I'm going to play a little bit of the video of Frank Terpil, Confessions of a Dangerous Man, for you to kind of lead into the Green Beret Special Forces kind of linked to the Blonde Ghost Network.
Republican Senator, and Theodore Shackley, then Deputy Director of the CIA. The question is, why did a man with these connections form a company with Frank Terpil to join the Russians, the East Germans, and the Bulgarians as suppliers to one of the most radical leaders in the Arab world? And how were Wilson and Terpil contracted to export tons of explosives, hundreds of classified night vision devices, and 500,000 detonators out of the United States for delivery to America's supposed arch enemy, Muammar Gaddafi? According to Mulcahy, these questions began to trouble him in the autumn of 1976.
I didn't know whether or not it was a CIA operation, whether it was a legitimate business deal. I just didn't know what the hell was going on.
At what stage did you report your worries to senior people in the CIA?
In September of 1976, I told the FBI and I told the Central Intelligence Agency in gross and dramatic detail. I laid out the cast of characters that were involved in every deal I was privy to. Every company that was involved in the supply end of it. They had, I don't know, unless I'd gone out myself and dropped the body over the transom to the FBI, I don't think they would have done anything with it.
The CIA knew about the operation in Libya in 1976, but nothing was done to stop it until April 1980. Why do you think Terpil and Wilson were allowed to carry on for nearly 4 years?
I have no idea. None whatsoever. It's one of the things that It bothered me enough so that I was willing to go public finally, after 4.5 years of silence.
Mulcahy was not the only one to report his concerns to the authorities.
Yellow palm the nose. Yellow palm the chin. Go to Roy.
These are the Green Berets, the elite commando corps, at their main training center in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. In 1976, Terpil and his cronies were active here, recruiting instructors for Qaddafi. Master Sergeant Luke Thompson was approached by one of them.
I was called to my home in Fort Bragg about 7:30 at night by a man who identified himself as Patry Loomis, and he asked if I was free to go abroad, discuss a contract of work in the intelligence field. And not really knowing who he was or anything about him, I had to lead him on to find out some specifics, because I thought he was from some foreign intelligence trying to subvert me. And he asked me if I could recruit a team of 5 people. So as soon as we got through talking, I called counterintelligence people and made them aware that I was approached by what I felt was a foreign agent. They came over to my house, and the intelligence people told me, said, this is completely legal and above board, so you have no worries. Pursue it as you desire. No problems.
With the apparent approval of counterintelligence and his own commanding officer at Fort Bragg, Luke Thompson took a squad of 5 men with 800 pounds of explosives to Libya. Shortly after his arrival, he was taken to a desert palace where Americans were priming ashtrays, books, even desks to explode on contact. Would you ever use these devices in conventional warfare?
No, it's not something that you would use as a device against an organized force.
What would you use these devices for?
Terrorist activities. Unsuspected civilians. Someone that would pick up an innocent item through ignorance.
What was Terpil doing out there?
He indicated he acted like he was chief of the operation.
Well, he was running the whole manufacturing facility in the palace.
Yes, he was.
We had one of the outbuildings or the outer buildings as an assembly point, an area of instruction for the assembly of these explosives. Who were you instructing? The people we were instructing the Libyan military, which I assume would be their equivalent of the special forces. Were you instructing any guerrilla groups from the outside, like ETA, Red Army, the Red Brigade, the IRA? If we were not cognizant of it, because we never spoke directly to the people. So you were instructing Libyan military personnel and others whose origins you didn't know, which we didn't know. True.
I decided, being active duty military, I better get out before things get too bad.
Why were you worried?
Well, I could see that this wasn't something that I should be doing. It was obvious that something was wrong. And I decided I'd best burn my bridges and get out. When I got back to the United States, I reported to the counterintelligence people that I had been reporting to all along.
And what did they say to you about your worries?
Obviously something's wrong. This is not an agency operation. So they put it back through the computer again, and they got a block somewhere. The agent told me, he said, we can only get so far up. It blocks.
And what does that mean?
It was stopped.
You were using agency and special forces personnel. You were using agency suppliers. How are you shipping the stuff? Through an agency, a freight forwarder. The latest CIA study describes Gaddafi as, quote, the most prominent state sponsor and participant in international terrorism, end quote. Isn't there some irony irony that you were using CIA suppliers, shippers, in some cases CIA personnel, to work for Gaddafi?
Gaddafi does not have the capability nor the facility to manufacture weapons at all. So we had to get them from leading powers. How they got them from leading powers? In most cases, the leading powers were cognizant of it. If they denied they were not cognizant of this thing, then where's their intelligence service?
Well, here we come to the central issue. We have the names of 43 people, American manufacturers, past and present members of the Special Forces, the CIA, who collaborated with you and Ed Wilson on the Libyan operation. Why was it permitted?
Wilson and myself collectively had enough information and intelligence on current and past operations that would prove to be a great embarrassment to the United States government.
So in a sense, you were blackmailing the CIA.
It was an unspoken blackmail, if you will. There was never any overtures made to threaten the CIA with blackmail, at least on my behalf, on my part.
Now, could there be another explanation that the work that you were doing in Libya was useful to the CIA?
They would have a knowledge of the amount of training, the skill that the people possessed, the possibilities of them launching operations on their own successful operations. They would have a psychological profile of the people that were trained. That may be of use to them.
What do you think Gaddafi would feel if he knew that CIA had penetrated his secret training facilities through you and Ed Wilson?
I can't speak for Gaddafi, but I could speak on behalf of the men. And the men said that he would be very, very disappointed if the agency had not penetrated his operations.
Why would he say that?
He felt that the CIA was one of the top 3 intelligence organizations in the world, and certainly he didn't put his state research in that league.
We questioned Terpil for hours about Libya, until we were almost certain that the so-called mastermind of international terrorism was in fact ignorant of the full implications of the role he had been permitted to play.
Why are there supposedly in the neighborhood of 42 unindicted co-conspirators? Why did these things in China Lake, which is a very secret facility, why did these people leave our employee in Libya, which we are not denying that they work for us in Libya? They left our employee in Libya, went back to China Lake, which is a very, very secret operation, clandestine operation. And these people went back to work there. The other ones that we had, which were CIA employees, we had people besides CIA employees. We had active duty special forces people, which were on 30 days leave to work for us in another location.
In Washington, we approached the CIA, the FBI, and the Justice Department for some comment on Terpil's activities, but this was consistently refused. But the implications of the Libyan operation extend far beyond Washington. As there are no direct flights between the United States and Libya, Terpil needed reliable transfer points in Europe where lethal material and armed personnel could be switched to Libyan flights without official interference. According to Mulcahy, London's Heathrow Airport was the most important link in the supply chain.
It's almost amusing the way Frank would conduct himself at Heathrow. It's probably the best example I can think of. Some of our people were walking around Heathrow somewhat disoriented and intoxicated, and with them they were carrying some concealed cans of binary explosives. Frank had promised these people that he would meet them at the airport when their plane landed. They would never have to worry about going through customs or anything else, as they could go directly to Libya. Well, Frank hadn't made it to meet the flight on its incoming leg. So I had to rouse Frank to make sure he could head to the airport before something difficult, before London was blown off the face of the map. Yes, that's in essence true. The shipment of the material was never to be bought out of the international zone. In other words, it was supposed to be transshipped immediately to another aircraft. Harper had made a mistake. He went right through the customs with the material in question, and I did have some associates within the British government at the airport that helped Harper and the material back on the plane.
So So when a man walks into Heathrow Airport with enough explosives to practically destroy London, you've got people there who can sort this out.
Yeah, I had certain facilities made available to me that the average bear wouldn't have had.
Off the record, Mulcahy named Terpil's high-level contact with British intelligence. Terpil confirmed the name and claimed that the man in question had done a good deal more than smooth the way with the British authorities.
And
So I wanted to play some of that because, they were basically this whole blonde ghost network that I'm talking about. So they were using Green Berets and everything. And one of those Green Berets ends up actually becoming an assassin, effectively, for the Libyan government. So the same Green Beret, Eugene Tafoya, was dispatched by Wilson on a request from Hijazi to assassinate a dissident Libyan student in Colorado. So when we look up Eugene, here we go. So uncover the mystery of a notorious Fort Collins shooting. And then you can actually go to CIA.gov, Eugene Tafoya, old UPI articles, and let me see if there's any videos. I'm not sure. Wow, so there actually is something here. All right, 1 minute. All right, so here we are. All right, so uncover the mystery of a notorious Fort Collins shooting. So in 1980, Fort Collins was home to what many believe was an act of international terrorism. So let me see what this is.
Been warned as an agency by the FBI about two people. One of them was Faisal Zagalai, and that he was being threatened, and he was considered to be on the quote, as we were told, the hit list of Muammar Gaddafi.
She went into the kitchen, and while she's there, she hears these 5 gunshots. She runs back into the room. The guy is gone, and her husband is slumped in the doorway.
Here you've got a fellow who believes that he's working for the CIA, try and intimidate this dissident student. Majority of potential jurors came into the case believing he was guilty. There had been overwhelming publicity about the nature of the crime, the helplessness of Zagalai, his combat background. He didn't come to trial as Mr. Popular, that's for sure. They called classified. Really what it was information they didn't want out because it was going to make them look bad. It's going to make the CIA office look bad. Somebody hired you. Why would he have gone to see Faisal Zagalai otherwise? Whether Wilson on his own or the CIA or both, just not the sort of thing. Democratic society.
Okay, so that's a quick little video. So there are 2 stories. So let me blow this up. There are 2 stories about the night a decorated ex-Green Beret shot a mild-mannered Libyan graduate student twice in the head and ran. The night a woman's terrified screams pierced a silent Fort Collins apartment complex, and FBI agents rushed to a humble college town of 65,000. So Fazil Zagali Wright and his wife Farida speak to the press during the trial of Eugene Tafoya at the old Larimer County Courthouse in 1981. Coloradan file photo. So that was October 14th, 1980. The people who know the truth are long gone. The whispers persist today about what really happened that night when Fort Collins earned the global spotlight and cemented a page in the history books for an undercover crime with international overtones, and the dramatic trial that followed when TV cameras, armed guards, and bomb squads flocked to our country's courthouse. So no matter how many years pass, our city will forever remain entangled in a web of suspected government corruption and international espionage. Through interviews, public records, and months-long search of newspaper reports the world over, the Coloradan uncovered a start-to-finish account of one of the most notorious crimes in Fort Collins history, including details never before reported. So there are two sides of the story. It's up to you, the reader, to decide which version is the truth. So Faisal Zagali was a 35-year-old Colorado State University graduate student from Libya who dared to leave his home country and speak out against a formidable dictator. Or he was a dissident plotting a coup to overthrow Libyan Prime Minister Muammar Gaddafi's regime, crafting radio broadcasts to endanger the unsteady detente between Israel and Egypt and Israel. So Eugene Tafoya was a three-time Purple Heart recipient who went to Zagali's South Shields apartment that night on the orders from the CIA, planned to threaten Zagali, maybe rough him up a bit, leave him scared and subdued, or he knocked on the door of an apartment G8 with a plan to commit murder. Physical liquidation is the final stage. Ray Martinez, the on-duty detective that night, was patrolling Fort Collins in his police cruiser around 7:30 p.m. when a familiar name rang out from the radio. Fazil Zaglai. Wasn't he the Libyan student who come to the police 6 months ago earlier asking for a concealed carry permit because his life was in danger? Wasn't he the guy supposedly on Gaddafi's hit list? When Martinez pulled up to 1917 South Shield Street, chaos reigned. Zaglai was bleeding from his head, collapsed in the doorway of his apartment near the Colorado State University campus as medics strapped him to a stretcher and loaded him in an ambulance. Furniture was strewn about the living room, and blood stained the carpet and door frame. The first 22 caliber bullet entered Zagala's head, circled his cranium, and severed the optic nerve in his right eye before lodging in the roof of his mouth. The second tore through his left ear and cheek. Catching a killer. So shootings stir up memories of the 1981 murders. If he survived, it would be a miracle. A man who shot him was already lost in darkness, but the shots he fired lit up the airwaves. The English language broadcast assigning credit to the attack to a Libyan nationalist group came just days later. It was part gloating triumph, part chilling warning. In affirmation of the fact that physical liquidation is the final stage in the revolutionary conflict dialogue, a member of the World Revolutionary Committee tried to liquidate one Faisal Zaglai. The job interview. Actually, interesting. Some photos. So that's in there. Wow. Pictured is Eugene Tafoya, the ex-Green Beret accused of attempted murder in the shooting of Zaghloul. He looks like Gene Hackman. Jeez. So that's a guard watching the top of the courthouse. Bomb disposal trailer stationed outside the courthouse during Eugene Tafoya's trial in 1981. It's the judge. Armed guard with metal detector. So Tafoya with his lawyers. Not the best photo. Maybe something's weird with my margins. Wow. So while her husband lay unconscious on the operating table at Hudray Valley Hospital, Farida Zaghloul was at the police station recounting the last few days in a low, smooth voice with the melodic lift of her native Arabic tongue. Ray told me they both had accents, and I found a video of her speaking at a conference online. The truth was, Farida and Fazil, the children of prominent Libyan families, darlings of the state and government scholarship recipients who lived in the U.S. for close to a decade, were broke. They'd lost their scholarships thanks to Gaddafi, who pulled the plug in 1979. That was 3 years after he promised physical liquidation of Libyans living overseas who wouldn't return home, and 2 years after he personally presided over the first of public hangings of Libyan dissidents. The Zaghlais were no longer the golden children of Libya. Fazil reportedly led demonstrations of mass Libyans on American soil and found a secret organization of Libyan students promoting a new society free of government control. But political liberation had at least one unwanted consequence. The Zaghlais were desperate for money, scrapping by with odd jobs and help from family. When a strange woman called their phone on October 13th, offering the couple an interview for jobs as interpreters for an insurance company, Fazil agreed. The call didn't strike him as particularly strange. Foreign students constantly receive calls from companies looking for cheap translation labor. The interviewer knocked on the door of the apartment G8 the next evening, 15 minutes late. He was middle-aged, about average height, and husky, his blondish hair balding at the crown of his blondish hair balding at the crown and his cheeks pockmarked. He had one crooked ring finger and wore jewelry and a clip-on tie. He was Eugene Tafoya, and Farida Zaghloul would not forget his face. He sat on the couch with Fazil, talking about the job prospect for 10 minutes. It was strange. He couldn't seem to come up with any traditional interview questions. His breath reeked of alcohol. The conversation grew quickly awkward, and Farida offered to get the stranger something to drink. When she was in the kitchen, she was in the kitchen pouring a glass of orange juice when her husband yelled out to her in Arabic. Farida, Farida, it's him, it's him. She raced to the bedroom, locked the door behind her, and began screaming for help, pounding on the window so hard she broke the glass. I felt that he killed my husband. He was going to come kill me, she later testified. As her husband's emergency surgery stretched on, Farida described the man who left her husband for dead to Craig Pursley, the arch teacher who did side work drawing suspect composites for a dozen law enforcement agencies. Back at the apartment, Martinez had found another witness. Martin Jarman was an athletic 24-year-old woman, or Marty Jarman was an athletic 24-year-old woman who lived next door to the Zaglais. She heard the commotion and darted outside, chasing the stranger out into the parking lot until words of warning sounded in darkness. Watch out, he's got a gun. Police officers combed the apartment complex, searching for a cigarette butt, a little piece of trash, a trace of blood, anything would do. Their search turned up little, a clip-on tie and some bullet fragments. Farida told Martinez that Tafoya carried a silver and blue handgun. It fit the description of a Saturday night special, a compact and inexpensive weapon used by an organized crime hitman. So the next day, detectives went to Denver's now decommissioned Stapleton International Airport, circulating the composite sketch of Tafoya in the hope that someone would recognize him. One person did, a shuttle bus driver who dropped Tafoya off at Banff Airways, a now defunct American airline. The FBI, who now involved in the investigation, checked out every man who departed on a Banff flight that night. They found no promising suspects. That soon became a theme as Fort Collins police spent months chasing fruitless leads. They collected fingerprints from the apartment, checked guest lists of every area motel, interviewed Zagalai's professors, neighbors, and friends. They even called in the ballistics experts to examine x-rays of Zagalai's skull for clues. They tapped Padre Valley's hospital phone lines after a man called the hospital, asked whether Zagalai was dead, then cursed and hung up when asked who he was. FBI agents visited more than 100 stores across the country that had sold clipped-on ties found at the crime scene. No one recognized the man in Pearlsky's sketch. With little evidence and waning leads, Martinez, who would later become Fort Collins mayor and now sits on city council, was the sole detective on the case by late November, but he had one thing on his side. Miraculously, Faisal was alive and he remembered everything. In a hospital room guarded by police officers, the man told Martinez his vision of the events that left him permanently blind in the right eye, but otherwise recovering. The recruiter seemed nervous and was no genius, he recalled, but he behaved normally enough until Farida left the room. Suddenly, the bumbling stranger stood up and began striking him with rapid-fire karate blows. Faisal raised his hands to his head to protect himself, and during the struggle, he saw Tafoya reach for a gun hidden under his coat. During the fight, Faisal groped under the couch cushion for his own gun, a 9mm semi-automatic pistol he hid in there in a fit of suspicion before the meeting, but he couldn't reach it. He came after me and I tried to get a hold of him, Zagalai later testified. I felt I was shot in my head and I felt the blood, but I kept struggling with him, trying to keep close to him so I could take his gun. We struggled from one end of the apartment to the other. Martinez suspected international espionage because Zaglai's Libyan connections, but the FBI wouldn't tell him anything of value. As he delved deeper into the case, he was admonished by federal agencies, denied information, and started getting threatening phone calls telling him to back off. The FBI even tried to get him fired from the police department for investigating the case's international ties without the agency's consent. So they called it classified information, Martinez recalled. Really, it was information they didn't want out because it was going to make them look bad. It was going to make the CIA office look bad. So a suspect. So the case went cold until February when two teenage boys found the answer to Martinez's dry spell lying in an irrigation ditch off West Horsetooth Road. It was a 22 caliber Magnum handgun, silver and blue and covered in rust. The FBI traced the gun to Tully Francis Strong, a short, amiable, retired dog warden who lived in a trailer park in the Florida Keys. He'd bought the gun at a pawn shop and sold it to his old friend from the military, Eugene Tafoya. Tafoya, 48, had enlisted in the military when he was 15 to fight in Korea and was awarded at least 3 Purple Hearts during 2 tours as a Green Beret in Vietnam. He'd been in special operations for more than 20 years. Police didn't have much else on him, but they had a mugshot. Albuquerque, New Mexico. Police had arrested Eugene Tafoya for drunk and disorderly conduct. Fazil and Farida instantly recognized the man in the mugshot. So Martinez trekked to Tafoya's modest mustard-colored home in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, armed with a bomb squad, a search warrant, and an affidavit for his arrest. The team arranged to have Tafoya's electricity turned off to lure him from the house. When he came out, Martinez's glance lowered to his hand. His left ring finger was crooked, just like Farida described. And that wasn't the only clue at his house. They found the jewelry and clothes of Farida remembered. They found receipts from a 2-night stay at a Holiday Inn in Fort Collins. They found hand-drawn maps of Zaghlai's apartment complex, a blue plastic folder full of Libyan money and cassette tapes of phone conversations about organization hits. "Do you know someone who should quit breathing?" said a man's voice on one of the tapes. "Permanently. Threat gone wrong." Wow. I'm gonna take a quick little break here. All right. So while Tafoya sat in solitary confinement in a Larimer County jail cell, the man he blamed for everything was 6,000 miles away, living the high life in a seaside villa in Tripoli, Libya. Edwin Wilson, a square-jawed, heavy-bowed millionaire tycoon, once worked as a spy for the Central Intelligence Agency. He grew rich off the shell businesses he used to gain intelligence. No one really knew who he worked for. Years later, when Wilson was sentenced to 52 years in prison for smuggling 20 tons of explosives, powerful explosives, from Houston to Libya, training terrorist cells, and arranging assassinations for Gaddafi, he told authorities he cozied up to the dictator only to dig up sought-after scoop for the CIA. Wilson, Tafoya later testified, had hired the ex-Green Beret to threaten Zaghlai, not to kill him. This became the beating heart of Tafoya's defense, led by top-rung Denver lawyers Walter Garish and Scott Robinson. The 2 bullets Tafoya put in Zaghlai's head were an act of self-defense. He was in Fort Collins that night out. So he was in Fort Collins that night out of service to his country. So Garash and Robinson were a near unstoppable duo that got an acquittal for former Denver police officer James King in Denver's notorious Father's Day massacre and a not guilty verdict for Iranian Ashin Sharitai, who shot 3 people who came to his home to harass him. Garash is now retired. Robinson continues to practice and serves as a legal analyst for 9 News. The trial lasted 4 weeks at the Larimer County Courthouse. After 2 unsubstantiated bomb threats, In one pesky rumor that Wilson's men were going to spring Tafoya out of jail, officials outfitted the courtroom entrance with metal detector, ordered 8th Judicial District Attorney Stu Van Meveren to wear a bulletproof vest, and stationed a Rockweiler and snipers on the roof buildings. Every day, courtroom number 5 was filled to capacity with international journalists, lawyers, and spectators. The majority of potential jurors came into the case believing he was guilty. Robinson recalled this fall from his Denver office. There had been overwhelming publicity about the nature of the crime, the helplessness of Zagalai, his combat background. He didn't come to trial as Mr. Popular, that's for sure. Pick a word to describe Tafoya: stoic, garrulous, calculating, stupid. Attorneys, witnesses, and newspaper clippings use them all. So the details of Tafoya's persona and history are so muddled that it's not even clear where he was born. His birth certificate reads February 28, 1933, but he later swore he fudged the date by 3 years so he can enlist in the National Guard as a minor. The son of a 33-year New Mexico State Police veteran, Tafoya dropped out of high school in truth of consequences to begin a lengthy, disjointed career in the armed forces. He served in the National Guard and the Marines before signing up as a Green Beret in Vietnam and Korea. He reportedly risked his life to pull 2 comrades under fire to safety during Vietnam during the siege of Quy My. At the time, he kept a small American flag in his pocket, explaining to a fellow Green Beret, "If I'm going to get zapped, I'd rather be zapped under the American flag." Strong, the veteran who sold Tafoya the gun he used to shoot Zagalai, told an Albuquerque Journal profiler that Tafoya was depressed about returning to civilian life in 1976. Tafoya told him he'd applied for a CIA job but was rejected, so he returned to his hometown, married an old acquaintance from high school, and took a construction jobs. Gene was a good soldier. Strong recalled in the journal article he had to have been to survive in Vietnam, but soldiering was all Gene really knew. By some accounts, Tafoya resorted to freelance CIA work after the agency wouldn't take him on full time. When police searched his home, they found evidence connecting him not only to the Zagalai shooting, but also to a 1979 car bombing in Kitchener, Ontario. That attack, too, was thought to be a bungled murder attempt tied to Wilson. Tafoya's tendency to record his phone conversations and hold onto receipts and other mementos was probably because he expected Wilson to reimburse him for his expenses, but it sure didn't help him in court. One thing did help him: he made an excellent witness. And that's high praise coming from Robinson, a seasoned defense attorney who admits he never liked Tafoya. The man answered questions directly. He never paused before answering, never minced his words, never danced with the prosecutors, as Robinson calls it. Never followed a yes, but never followed a yes with a but, the cardinal sin of witnesses. And most importantly, he truly seemed to believe the story he told the jury. Wilson hired him to deliver a message to Zagalai. He chatted with the Libyan dissident for 10 to 15 minutes, and when his wife left the room, he leaned in close. You've been making and preparing broadcasts to the Middle East about things that are upsetting detente. He got the message and just erupted. Tafoya testified. He started yelling and everything broke loose before I finished. He was yelling in Arabic. I tried to calm him down, but he just kept yelling, and I heard a glass breaking and his wife yelling in another room. Tafoya saw Zagalai yank a pistol from beneath the couch cushion, and the 2 men struggled. When Tafoya's gun went off, Zaglai fell to the floor, and the ex-Green Beret darted into the night. So strong was Tafoya's conviction that his attorneys couldn't help but believe him too. Um, Jarash, famous for making a scene in the courtroom, wore a green beret every day of the trial and showed the jury photos of Tafoya wearing all his medals. Reading aloud one of Tafoya's army commendations, Jarash broke down and cried. Tafoya never did. He felt betrayed, Robinson said. But he also was stoic about it. Maybe that sounds contradictory, but I think it kind of goes with the territory. If you do special ops in Vietnam and things go bad, you're not going to rush to say, hey, he's ours. It was the same thing here. I think he realized that he screwed up the mission. He wasn't surprised. Still, Garash and Robinson wanted to prove the CIA had been involved in the shooting, so they subpoenaed two agents for Robinson to question. Robinson spent hours preparing for those cross examinations, researching the CIA in Libya, and carefully crafting questions that would be difficult for them to wriggle out of. But the men answered query after query with the same stiff, packaged reply. That's outside of my area of knowledge. What you're really saying when you say that's classified. Is that true? Robinson finally asked one of the men, and he said yes. Robinson recalled. So we're in business right then and there. The jury knew there was some CIA involvement. Whether Tafoya's story was true, that was up to them to decide. Robinson considered that the defense's big eureka moment, that their introduction of lesser charges for the jury to deliberate. After 4 days of deliberation, the jury settled on a couple of lesser charges: third-degree assault and conspiracy to commit assault, two misdemeanors for a man charged with attempted murder. Robinson and Garash were overjoyed. This wasn't justice, Zagalai reportedly cried when he heard the verdict, slamming his fist against the courtroom wall. I think there is some hidden hand behind the whole goddamn trial, he told a ring of reporters outside the courtroom. I think the decision was prejudiced. This is supposed to be a system that fights terrorism. This invites terrorism. Tafoya wasn't happy either. 2.5 hours after the verdict was announced, he walked out of the Larimer County Jail a free man. For now, his sister secured his $10,000 appeal bond with a cashier's check. Speaking to a swarm of reporters, he said in a voice barely above a whisper that the verdict could have been worse. He declined to elaborate on Robinson's comments that the CIA had left him holding the bag. Racked with legal fees, Tafoya returned to his mustard-colored house in Truth and Consequences while he waited out the appeals process. He told the Associated Press he was looking for a collaborator on a book or movie script about his experiences. I'm in debt at least until the year 2000, he said in January 1982. At my income, I'll probably pass on my debts to my grandchildren. His appeal failed. So did his attempt to sue Larimer County Sheriff Jim Black for more than $35 million over alleged mistreatment. A year later, he was arrested in El Paso in connection to the Canada car bombing. He spent the next 6 years on trial in prison or both for the Fort Collins shooting, the Canada car bombing, and tax evasion. He never paid taxes for the $86,000 Wilson paid him to take care of Zagalai's prosecutors alleged. In March 1989, Tafoya finished his final prison sentence and returned to El Paso, broke and dejected. He died there on June 22nd, 1997. He was 62 or 65. He's buried at the Fort Bliss National Cemetery alongside tens of thousands of U.S. military veterans and their spouses. So nobody interviewed for this article knows where Fazil Zaglai ended up. Go ahead, Google him. You'll find nothing recent. At some point after the trial, Farida Zaglai left the U.S. for the Middle East, where she's held several high-profile positions in the United Nations and national government organizations. She couldn't be reached for comment on the story, and it's unclear if she's still married to Fazil or if he's still alive. The Libyans who remained in Fort Collins lived changed lives, lives tinged with fear. Libyan students at CSU told the Colorado in 1981 that for months after the shooting, they were afraid to fall asleep each night, answer the door, or pick up the phone. Every time I open the door, I am afraid I will face a man with a gun, one Libyan told the Coloradan on condition of anonymity. Libyans all over the country were scared because they didn't believe the cold hand could reach them. Evan Velazquez, then director of CSU Sociology Department, told the Coloradan after the shooting. It is hard for Americans to understand, Velazquez continued. They have no law in Libya. The revolutionary committees are above reproach. They could go into a home tomorrow and kill someone, and no one could do anything about it. The people are ruled by revolutionary thugs and a maniac. At least one person remained optimistic. 3 months after Eugene Tafoya shot Fazil Zaglai and left him for dead, a reporter asked Zaglai why he thought Libya had chosen him. The sociology student, half blind and scarred, shrugged and said he guessed his turn was first. Opposition to Gaddafi is growing large, Zaglai said of the deposed leader who died in 2011. Maybe he thought this was one way to cool things, to randomly pick someone. He may have scared someone for a while, but after a while it becomes better to be dead than to live in fear. Wow, that's a good article. So that's very interesting. I'm going to do something real quick. All right, so I'm about to wrap this up here, but yeah, I just wanted to talk about that curious case of what his name was, Tafoya, the Eugene Tafoya, because I don't know, just another random person who popped up in my research into what I call the Blonde Ghost Network. But interesting is that Edwin Wilson in the Blonde Ghost Network, they kind of used a lot of these Green Berets to be like their hit people, right? But in the case of Eugene Tafoya, he was kind of a sloppy guy. So it seems like some of the guys were kind of defective because they were just kind of, I hate to say it, veterans with some issues. But then some of them seem to have been pretty successful in their missions of being kind of assassins, particularly even in like overseas in Germany and places like that. But regardless, there was another Green Beret named Billy Wow, I think is his name, and he's kind of a legendary figure. Um, so was a United States Army Special Forces soldier and Central Intelligence Agency paramilitary officer who served more than 50 years between the United States Army's Green Berets and the CIA Special Activities Division. So interesting, if you actually go down. So after Weil retired from the military, he worked for the United States Postal Service until he accepted an offer in 1977 from ex-CIA officer Edwin P. Wilson, to work in Libya on a contract to train the country's special forces. This was not an agency-endorsed assignment, and Weil could have found himself in trouble with U.S. authorities if it were not for the fact that he was also approached by the CIA to work for the agency while in Libya. The CIA tasked him with surveilling Libyan military installations and capabilities. This was of great interest to the United States intelligence as Libya was receiving substantial military assistance from the Soviet Union at the time. Wilson was later indicted and convicted in 1979 for illegally selling weapons to Libya. It was later found that the United States Department of Justice had relied on a false affidavit when prosecuting Wilson. As a result, Wilson's convictions were overturned in 2003 and he was freed the following year. So let me do one more thing. Actually, let me go back to this article. And it talks about wow. So let me see here. I want to about this shooting in West Germany. Let me pause it real quick. Okay, so I just looked this up real quick. So interesting. So foe of Gaddafi killed by a Libyan in Bonn. A Libyan student testified Monday he was kidnapped, beaten with electric cables, and threatened with death for 2 days. So interesting. Let me click on these because they're saying that one of the guns was traced to Fayetteville, North Carolina. Interestingly. So foe of Gaddafi killed by a Libyan in Bonn. So an exiled opponent of Colonel Muammar el-Gaddafi, the Libyan leader, was shot and killed today by a Libyan gunman on a crowded Bonn shopping street. The slaying of Jabril el-Denali, 30 years old, who was seeking political asylum here, was the latest in a series of killings involving political opponents to the Libyan dictator, and the second one in Bonn. So in May 1980, Amran Madavi, a former Libyan diplomat, was shot dead by a Libyan gunman on a downtown Bonn street. A police spokesman identified the man who shot Mr. Denali as Fatih T, a 29-year-old Libyan national. He said Mr. Denali had been shot in the head several times and had died of his wounds in the hospital. A West German woman was seriously wounded in the stomach, and a male passerby was grazed by a bullet, he said. The spokesman said the gunman with a 9mm pistol uh, still in his hands was apprehended by an off-duty policeman soon after the shooting. The killings come at an awkward time for the Bonn government, which is seeking to maintain normal ties with Libya. There have been increasing charges of harassment of Libyan political exiles in West Germany, including cases involving members of Libya's diplomatic mission. And before I end this, just to talk about more of the Special Forces Green Beret stuff, connections to the Blonde Ghost Network, is Michael Hand, and he's just a case in and of himself. So, was an ex-U.S. Green Beret known for co-founding the Nugan Bank. He more recently had been the owner of Tops Knives. So in May 1963, he enlisted in the United States Army, where he served as Army Special Forces. After Special Forces training at Fort Bragg, Hand was posted to Vietnam, where he received a Purple Heart, a Silver Star, and a Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest military award in the United States military. He received this for his actions in 1965 in defending Special Force camps at Dong Xuai, against a Viet Cong attack during the Battle of Dong Xuai. So reporter Jonathan Quitty, who wrote extensively on the Nugan Hand Bank, cites passport documents in which Hand claimed to have left the army in 1966. And from 1966 to 67 worked directly for the U.S. government. According to another unnamed source cited by Quitney, Hand helped train guerrilla forces in Laos and worked with Air America crews that supplied them. So we can go. But he also knew, interestingly, skip down. Efforts to arrange deals include incorporating a company in Pretoria, South Africa, and sending Bernie Houghton and two Nugan Hand employees to the United States to meet Edwin Wilson. And this was cited by Alfred McCoy in his book The Politics of Heroin, CIA Complicity in the Drug Trade. So just even more Green Beret stuff there. So I'm gonna wrap this video up. So thanks for listening in. All right, peace.